One of the questions frequently posed to my associates at Whistle Blowers is the question, how do we handle malicious reporting? This is a question often raised by potential clients considering the installation of a third-party professionally managed ethics hotline. My name is Penny from Ethicalways. I'm an expert in organization behavior. I spent a few decades as an HR executive. I've handled receipt of reports and investigation into whistleblower reports, and today I specialize in the promotion of cultures of integrity in organizations. And so the whistleblowers team asked me just to share some of my off the top of the head views about the subject of malicious reporting. The first thing to say is that there is some good news. The good news is that malicious reports will make up a very small percentage of the reports that you receive over time. Most people who report make reports in the best interests of the organization and provide information that is very helpful to you. But we do have those instances where malicious reports are made, and should I say, fictitious reports. The truth is that people have been making fictitious reports for a very long time in organizations. It's not that implementing an ethics hotline is going to encourage these reports. It's really a different vehicle via which you might receive fictitious information. Many of you will have had examples of people who've written anonymous letters to the chairman of your board making outrageous claims, and then having to defend yourself, the frustration that goes with that bad feeling that there's some kind of a doubt or cloud hanging over you. So today what I want to do is to talk about how to deter and then, if they do happen, manage those reports. It's a tricky thing. It's difficult, it's time consuming, and there's no magic bullet solution. But because it's going to happen, let's talk about some of the issues that you're going to face. What's very important, of course, is that we distinguish between malicious calls that have truthful content and malicious calls that contain fictitious content. We do have people who make calls out of a sense of indignation, revenge, wanting to get at a colleague, and in so doing provide us with truthful information that's very valuable. And we really want that information because it's about integrity and unethical activity in our organizations. So let's put those whistleblowing reports to one side as being of importance and of value to investigate. What we're really talking about here is fictitious reporting that is done for disruptive and clearly unethical reasons. So the first thing to say is that in your policy, you really need a very clear, distinct section that deals with a prohibition on fictitious reporting and sets out the law in this regard. If you're a South African-based company, the law was amended at the end of 2017 to make provision for sanctions against people who make malicious reports deliberately. And all other countries have laws that speak to this topic. So we can even help you look at your ethics policy, your whistleblowing policy, to ensure that you have a properly beefed up section on the consequences of malicious, fictitious reporting. I think it's worth saying that if a person tries to make a fictitious report to the information center operated by whistleblowers, this is what they're going to encounter. They're going to encounter information agents who have been trained by experienced and highly skilled detectives in interviewing techniques that enable them to screen for malicious information. Think about it. These are people who day in and day out receive reports. They're specialists. They see the patterns. They recognize and sense and can target their questions. And what often happens is that a person making the fictitious report realizes that they are not coming across as credible and will typically terminate the call. So qualified information agents will actually screen out and reduce the number of fictitious reports that you receive. Obviously, this is not a foolproof process, and the reality is that the fictitious reports are more likely to be made via a website, via anonymous letter, and deliberately using a forum where they're not open to being questioned and interrogated on their responses. The reality is that a malicious report or a person intent on making malicious reports is disruptive in the organization, and the effective handling of actual fictitious reports is a very time-consuming and resource-draining exercise. So it's a good thing that these cases are in the minority, but it's still great for us to have the opportunity to talk about some of the issues. Who are these people that make fictitious reports for disruptive purposes? Well, often they're employees who have suffered some terrible disappointment that they blame the organization for. Maybe they've been overlooked for promotion. Or often there are also people who you are currently in a process with, for example, a performance process where you are trying to draw their attention to their shortcomings and their development needs, and they are not wanting to accept the feedback that you are giving them. There's always going to be that tricky percentage of employees who, when you try and hold up a mirror, simply cannot look into it. Instead, what they do is that they turn their frustration and anger against the organization. There are also people, of course, who dislike others and have reason to create a cloud of suspicion on those people and simply make up information. So these are the kind of situations that we're dealing with. And we'll talk briefly about the management of these different situations. What we really need to guard against is this natural instinct of putting on the brakes the minute you feel that you're getting malicious reports that may well be from someone that you are currently in a process with, or somebody who you know has had a recent setback and disappointment and is acting out against the organization in other ways. There'll often be other signs of their unhappiness, their resentment. There'll be a change in attitude. They may well have been really great employees at one point in time, but as we know, no organization can provide for every employee's career growth needs as these change over time. And there are always going to be times when we are disappointing as employers in terms of what we can deliver, in terms of what employees' wishes are. It's very important, assuming that you're in the performance process phase, that you don't immediately put on brakes and stop your process. What is important is that you ensure that you are doing it in a way that is consistent with the requirements of employment legislation. In South Africa, we would refer to Schedule 8 of the Labour Relations Act. This means you need to be doing a professional job of your performance counseling. You need to be documenting what you're doing. But what I would really advise is that if you suspect that the person you're in this process with is in a state of such aggrievement that they are acting in these disruptive ways, that one ensures that the tone one's taking in these discussions is one of great professionalism and neutrality. Very important not to allow your suspicions and frustrations to spill over and to contaminate that performance process. A very good idea to ensure that your head of industrial relations and employment relations, or if necessary, your third-party employment lawyer, is aware of the fact that you are going through performance or even misconduct management processes with someone who you believe is now engaging in disruptive behavior, just to ensure that you really are on the right track. But it's so important that you don't now mess up that process by drawing back or withdrawing from the process, which creates a whole lot of other problems down the line when you want to reestablish it. Have the courage of your convictions and move forward. The most important thing you need to do for all categories of malicious reporters, whatever their intention, is to carry out a really professional interview process or specifically, more broadly, investigation process. Often when we receive malicious reports, we're just so frustrated at the time that will be taken. We've concluded that they're malicious and we just disregard them. And this is a really bad mistake. The thing is that there's great reputational harm afoot when someone is determined to make these fictitious allegations public. It can be to your chairman of your board, member of your audit committee, perhaps the audit chairman, the public, social media. People make information available behind a mask in order to cause disruption. And your only defense is that you have conducted a really thorough investigation. You need to be in a position to show that you didn't just write the investigation off. That just looks defensive. It's no good if the chairman of the board comes to you and says, well, we've received this letter alleging the following, that you start giving 10 reasons why you know that it can't possibly be the case, because of course you immediately look defensive and you're in a no-win situation. In fact, what we could say is that when we're handling malicious reports, we're talking about damage limitation. It's very hard to find a win-win outcome in these situations, and there are very few win-lose outcomes. What we're doing is planning an approach that reduces damage and limits the extent of damage and harm. For it's not only the resources that are consumed, it's the culture of mistrust, the toxic environment that gets created for those under suspicion in the team where the matter is taking place. And so we want these processes to be addressed very professionally and as fast as we possibly can. Third-party support is really essential in these situations, if at all possible. Really, the price you're going to pay to have experts supporting you in your investigation is a small price when we compare it to the extent of reputation harm that can happen when we find ourselves with allegations being made publicly, but without a substantial internal investigation to back up our version, our reality. We find that a third-party investigator at the heart of the planning with you as to the approach to take, the person who knows to bring in the internal or the external auditor, the IT specialist, working together with your human resources or employment relations team is going to be a really valuable asset. The important thing about trained investigators, again, is that this is what they do day in and day out. They're experts at detecting untruths, to detecting people who are reluctant to be truthful. And what we do know is that when people are interviewed, they're actually much more likely to share the truth and be honest with a third party. It's really hard for your employees to walk back something with you directly and say, well, I know that when you first confronted me, I said, of course not. But in actual fact, I was lying at that point. People don't like to do that. They're much more likely to be honest with a third-party investigator. These investigators, with their own pattern recognition skills, are expert at creating an environment in which they can elicit the kind of information that's needed to pursue and draw a conclusion. I spent years recruiting people. I've conducted more interviews than I can possibly imagine or count. But the truth is that the investigators that I know, the professional investigators, have the expertise to gather insights and evidence through interviews that I simply don't have. The other thing to say is that by interviewing as many people as possible associated with the matter, the investigator can make a report that corroborates your view that this is a fictitious or malicious matter that is not a cause for concern by your governance leaders in the organization. And this is a really helpful thing to have achieved. What about the people that false allegations are made against? It's really important that their rights are protected. and it's jolly difficult. You may decide whether or not to even tell them that an allegation has been made against them. It's sometimes the right thing and sometimes not the right thing to do, which is why we look at each case on its merits. I think I'll say something a bit controversial now, but I feel really strongly about it. And I want to talk to you about the fact that professional investigators do have access to polygraph technology, which can be used safely by you in the process of clearing people of false allegations. I'm not talking about what we all know to be a challenge, and that is using the polygraph results on their own to decide on guilt. I'm talking about something very different, and that is the value of interviews and supported, if necessary, by a polygraph that aim to provide the person who's had accusations made against them the opportunity to have the allegations put to them by an independent party, to answer those questions truthfully, and for you to get the insight that they have truthfully or not answered to the allegations. I know people who will tell you that they are so grateful to have had the opportunity of talking to a third-party investigator, to have had whatever investigation undertaken to clear their name. That allows people who've been falsely accused to move on and to feel comfortable. These might be people who are really important to your organization, and you need them to feel that they are not living with a cloud hanging over their head. So talk to your investigator. Often, of course, it doesn't come to that because proper investigators, professional investigators, will often elicit honesty from the various people that you want to be interviewed without any need to offer them the option of a polygraph. But I would still say that this is something you really should discuss with your investigation service provider. Your ethics hotline cannot investigate your reports. That is not their role. What they can do is possibly advise and direct you to appropriate third-party investigators who are experts in handling whistleblowers, in protecting identities, and knowing the Protected Disclosures Act. I'm not talking about any old detective or investigator. I'm talking about people who are expert in investigating whistleblower allegations. They exist. Talk to whistleblowers and they'll be able to give you some referrals. Remember too that whistleblowers can make contact again where they have the code name or a reference number or any contact number with the person making the report, so that they can engage in follow-up questions and queries in order to help test your hypotheses and possibly prove or disprove your belief that the allegation is malicious. I've spoken briefly today about some of the things that you need to be thinking about as you anticipate and respond to malicious reports. The most important thing that I can say to you is that expert help is important. Carrying out a professional investigation is a really profoundly valuable use of your time and resources. And you need to proceed with confidence. Do not be set back and deterred by malicious reporters intent on disruption. It's only going to complicate and draw the matter out. If you are handling your employee relations issues in a way that is compliant with the law, especially if you're documenting the process, it is highly unlikely that an employee false claim of victimization will prevail. The final thing I want to guard against is that you should not immediately label someone a whistleblower just because they've made a report. Whistleblower is a status that we accord to someone who has made a report in good faith and who is entitled to the protection of the legislation that governs reporting on unethical activity, whatever country it is that you are in. But I've seen time and again employers and leaders talk about the whistleblower this, the whistleblower that, when what they're actually talking about is the person who made this fictitious allegation, or the person who made what appears to be a fictitious allegation. Don't label them a whistleblower. It's very convenient and easy. It's a shorthand. But remember, this person does not deserve the protection and the rights of a whistleblower operating with integrity. So don't give them the status by labeling them as a whistleblower in your discussions with each other and your reports. But it is a time where time, effort, resources, and especially expert advice is needed. And you shouldn't hesitate to discuss with whistleblowers the fact that you believe that a report you've received is malicious, in order that they can be aware of this, to make a note on the file in case the caller makes contact again, and of course, to possibly direct you to suitable investigators to help you with the matter. I hope that these few words on the topic of handling malicious callers will give you the comfort to know that malicious callers are in the minority. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. They're going to happen whether you have an ethics hotline or not. But at least with whistleblowers as your provider, you can be sure of getting support, guidance that comes from a point of deep, long established expertise.